Macon, Mississippi is the kind of place America rarely stops to explain. It is a small town in Noxubee County, but the story around it is much bigger than the map. Deep in Mississippi soil, deep in Black memory, deep in family lines. And yet, almost nobody talks about it. That matters, because when a place holds generations of Black life, Black labor, Black struggle, Black worship, and Black survival, but still gets pushed to the edges of the story, that silence tells us something too. This is not just about one town. This is about what gets remembered, what gets ignored, and why. For some families, Macon is not a footnote. It is the beginning. It is where names start. It is where roots go deep. It is where people learned how to survive under pressure, how to build under limits, and how to carry memory even when history looked the other way. Before Macon became part of our ancestors' story, this land was already part of another people's heartbreak. Near here, at Dancing Rabbit Creek, the 1830 treaty helped force the Choctaw from their homeland and open the way for white settlement. So when people talk about Macon as if it simply appeared, they leave out the wound underneath it. They leave out what had to be cleared. They leave out who had to be pushed aside. They leave out how American expansion so often began with removal first. That is where this story starts. Not with comfort, not with a peaceful town rising naturally from the soil, but with loss, power, and land being taken. Even that was not the end of the story, because when slavery ended, the labor did not end, the need for white control did not end, and the struggle over Black life in places like Macon did not end. Freedom came on paper, but paper did not plow fields, feed families, or protect Black people from a system already learning how to reshape itself. Many who had once been enslaved were pushed right back onto the same land through sharecropping, debt, and labor arrangements designed to keep them dependent. They were told they were free, but freedom was fenced in. The land was still in somebody else's hands. The power was still in somebody else's hands, and the people who had done the work all along were now expected to survive inside a new version of the same old order. That is part of what makes Macon so important, because this is not only a slavery story, it is also a story about what came after, about Black people trying to build life under pressure, trying to hold family together, trying to make something out of land they worked but did not own. So when we look at Macon, we are not just looking at what was taken, we are also looking at what our people were forced to carry long after emancipation was supposed to mean a new beginning. And if you're still watching, subscribe, like this video, and turn on the notifications so you don't miss what comes next. Supporting this channel helps me keep telling the stories people were never supposed to forget, and we are only getting started. That is why the real story of a place like Macon was never going to live only in official records. Some of it lived in courthouses, in census lines, in land papers, and in the names of men who profited from the system. But some of it lived somewhere else too. It lived on porches, in family talk, in warnings passed down low, in the names older people still remembered when the history books had already moved on. The porch was not just a place to sit, it was a place to watch, to listen, to measure danger, to remember who had been there before, and to hold on to truths that were never safely spoken out loud in public. If the county kept one version of Macon, the Porch kept another. And maybe that is why places like this still matter so much. Because even when power tried to write the story one way, memory kept refusing to disappear. That is how Black history survives in places people overlook, not only in monument or headlines, but in voices, in family lines, and in the quiet knowledge that what happened here was bigger than what most people were ever taught to see. And once you start following the names in places like Macon, another layer comes into view. Because history is not only made of suffering, it is also made of the people who benefited from that suffering, built status from it, and expected that status to be remembered as respectable. Families with land, influence, and local standing were not standing outside the system. They were part of it. Their names showed up in property, in records, in slave schedules, and in the structure of the town itself. On porches in a place like Macon, people did not always tell history straight. Sometimes they told it sideways, wrapped in a story, the way people do when the truth is too heavy to carry plain. They might start with the weather, with the sound of insects in the evening, with somebody rocking slow in a wooden chair. And then somebody older would say this land was never quiet the way people think. Long before the town had its name, long before the roads and fields and courthouse, something else was here. They would talk about Choctaw presence like it still lingered in the trees, in the wind, in the ground itself. They would tell of signs people claimed they had seen, little clouds hanging where they should not have been, fire striking a tree like the land was answering back. Maybe that was myth. Maybe that was memory dressed up in story. But either way, the lesson was the same. This place did not begin clean. And later, when the land had been cleared, when the farms were running, when Black hands were working soil they did not own, the Porch kept telling on the place. Not always directly, sometimes through ghost stories, sometimes through warnings, sometimes by the way older folks lowered their voices when certain names came up. Because on a porch, people could say just enough for you to understand without saying everything out loud. That was the power of the Porch. It held the kind of truth the record books could not carry. The kind that lived in feeling, in memory, in the hush after somebody finished talking. In Macon, a porch story was never just entertainment. That is why these stories matter. Because they remind us that the ground was never silent. The land remembered, the people remembered, and even when the official story moved on, the Porch kept carrying what history left behind. What follows is a dramatized porch story, not a documented incident. The porch boards creak beneath her chair, still warm from the day's sun as dusk settles softly over Macon. The air hangs heavy, thick with stories waiting to be told. Her voice is slow, deliberate, carrying the weight of generations. Before us, before the cotton fields, before the songs and the sorrow, this land belonged to the Choctaw, she says, eyes fixed on the ancient oak standing sentinel in the yard, its bark marked by old lightning scars. Spanish moss drapes silently from its branches, swaying gently in the stillness. The children lean in closer, their faces serious, illuminated by the soft glow of lamplight. The Choctaw walked these fields long before, named the rivers, left footprints deep in the red clay. Then came the removal, forced away, leaving behind a silence that still lingers. Her hands rest on her lap, fingers worn and steady like the porch rail beneath them. Our people came after, brought in chains, working the same earth, hearing the same wind whisper through the trees. The land holds it all, their footsteps, our sweat, the memory of every loss and every labor. Low clouds press close, folding memory into the night. We live where histories meet, where silence speaks louder than words. The land don't forget, neither should we. And that is where the triplet name begins to matter. Not just as a family name in the record, but as part of the planter class that helped shape this region. Because in places like Macon, names were never just names. They pointed to land, to standing, to ownership, and to a whole social order built to keep power in the same hands. The planter class did not simply live on the land, they organized life around it. They helped define who had influence, who was respected, who was protected, and who was expected to stay beneath them. Their names carried weight in the county because the system was designed to honor people like them. So when we speak of names like triplet, we are not just tracing ancestry. We are tracing the people who stood near the top of a system that shaped the town, the county, and the lives inside it. And that matters, because once you move from the name to the land, you begin to see that Macon was not only built by memory, it was also ordered by power. That matters because plantation owners were not just private individuals minding their own business. They were part of a larger class structure tied to land, production, status, and control. Their names showed up in records because the world they lived in was built to remember them. That is part of what makes a place like Macon so revealing. Some people were preserved in the story as builders, landholders, and respectable citizens. But respectability in that world was often built inside a brutal order, one that gave certain families standing while forcing others to live under the weight of it. Names like triplet begin to matter here, not because one family explains everything, but because the record shows how power settled into a place. Triplet was not alone. Other names also appear across land records, property records, and the structure of county life, reminding us that this was never just one family's story. It was a local order, a class of people whose standing rested on land, control, inheritance, and the labor system beneath them. In places like Macon, names carried more than identity. They carried weight. They told you who owned, who decided, who was protected, and who was expected to stay in their place. Those names mattered because they were tied to more than memory. They were tied to influence, to local standing, and to the power to shape what kind of history would be remembered and what kind would be pushed aside. The deeper truth is that when we tell the story of Macon, we are not merely tracing one surname. We are exposing the structure that gave certain families position, protection, and permanence, while others were forced to live under the shadow of it for generations. That is what makes old names so revealing in a place like this. They show us that power was not abstract. It lived in families, on land, and in the habits of a town that learned who to honor and who to overlook. Behind names like triplet was a whole plantation world, and that world shaped more than land ownership. It shaped the rhythm of life, the meaning of respectability, and the structure of power in places like Macon. Plantations were not just stretches of land with a big house sitting on them. They were part of a social order, a way of organizing labor, wealth, inheritance, and local influence, so that certain families remained near the top and others were forced to live beneath them. That is part of what made old names carry so much weight. They were connected to more than memory. They were connected to a world that taught people who was important, who was protected, whose word carried authority, and whose version of the story would be written down as the official one. In places like this, even respectability had a structure. It was tied to land, to family standing, to inheritance, and to the ability to move through the county as someone whose name already meant something before you ever entered the room. That kind of power did not stay inside one house or one field. It spread through the habits of a town, through who got listened to, who got deferred to, and who got remembered as important. So when we talk about the plantation world around Macon, we are not talking only about property. We are talking about an order that trained people to recognize power on sight and to treat some families as if they naturally belonged above everyone else. That is why local history can be so misleading when it is told too softly, because the language of prominence, standing, and good family names can make a brutal system sound almost ordinary. But there was nothing ordinary about a world built this way. Beneath the surface of respectability was a harder truth. Land was not just land, it was power. A family name was not just identity, it was access. Local importance was not just admiration. It often meant being woven into a system that decided whose labor counted, whose pain disappeared into the background, and whose story would be preserved as the story of the place itself. In a place like Macon, that kind of respectability could settle so deeply into the town that people stopped questioning it. Old names got repeated with pride. Old families got remembered as builders. Old structures got treated like they had simply always been there. But history is not that innocent. When a town learns to honor power without asking what that power was built on, silence becomes part of the inheritance too. And that is what makes places like Macon so revealing. If you only listen to the polished version, you will miss the structure underneath it. You will miss the difference between being remembered and being protected. You will miss how a whole local order can hide itself inside the language of respectability. That is how power survives longest in a place like this. Not only through force, but through memory shaped to protect itself. Now that brings us to the harder questions. If these families stood near the top of the order, then who was carrying it? Who was making the land profitable? Who was turning fields into wealth, county standing into permanence, and respected names into something history chose to preserve? That is where the story shifts again. Because the deeper you go into Macon, the harder it becomes to talk about the people at the top without finally turning toward the people underneath them. The polished version of local history can only hold for so long before the labor behind it starts to come into view. And once that labor comes into view, the whole town begins to look different. Not smaller, not simpler, but heavier. Because now we are no longer talking only about who held power. We are beginning to talk about who paid for it. By 1860, the scale of that system in Noxubee County was impossible to ignore. More than 15,000 enslaved black people were living there. That was not a side note in the county's history. That was the backbone of it. Those were the people whose forced labor made the land profitable, built fortunes for white landowners, and turned this part of Mississippi into plantation country. So when people speak softly about local standing and good family names, they often leave out the human foundation underneath it. But there is no honest way to tell the story of Macon without facing that foundation, because the wealth, power, and structure of the place did not rise from nowhere. They rose from black labor under bondage on land already marked by removal and loss. Slavery ending did not mean the pressure ended. In places like Macon, freedom did not arrive as a clean break or a brand new beginning. It came into a world where the land was still in somebody else's hands. The power was still in somebody else's hands. And black people were still expected to survive inside a system designed to keep them dependent. Many who had once been enslaved were pushed right back onto the same soil through sharecropping, debt, and labor arrangements that changed the name of the order without changing its weight. They were told they were free, but freedom was fenced in. Paper freedom could not feed a family, protect a household, or undo generations of stolen labor overnight. If this sounds familiar, it should. This is the same pattern I've talked about in my Black Codes videos. Freedom was declared, but control did not disappear. It changed form. If you haven't seen those videos yet, go back and watch them, because they help explain exactly what places like Macon were up against. That is what made freedom feel so fragile in a place like this. Emancipation changed the law, but it did not instantly change the balance of power. The old order was shaken, but it was not gone. It learned how to survive in contracts, in debt, in land arrangements, and in the daily pressure placed on black families trying to live. So when people talk about the end of slavery as if one chapter closed neatly and another opened cleanly, Macon tells a harder truth. What ended in name did not end in burden. What changed on paper did not change overnight in the field, in the county, or in the structure of who had control. Black people here were not only trying to survive bondage, they were trying to survive what came after it too, in a world that still wanted their labor while denying them full power over their own lives. Macon becomes more than one town's story here. It becomes a window into what freedom looked like when the law changed faster than the land did. Families still had to work, raise children, worship, remember, and survive inside a place where the old order remained close enough to breathe on them. That kind of pressure shaped decisions. It shaped movement. It shaped who stayed, who left, and who kept trying to build something out of the little room they were given. Survival was not only about working the land, it was about learning the rules that were never fully spoken out loud, knowing when to move, when to stay quiet, when to hold on. That kind of knowledge came from experience, memory, and the stories people carried with them. The porch matters again here. Long after the laws changed, the porch remained a place where truth could still be spoken another way. Not always directly, not always loudly, but clearly enough for those who knew how to listen. This next story is not taken from one single record. It is the kind of story that lived on porches, passed down in pieces, carried in memory, and shaped by the kind of life people had to live in places like Macon, The porch boards creak under the weight of the day as dusk settles in. An older voice begins slowly, not in a hurry, not trying to impress anyone, just telling what needs to be told. There were rules, the voice says, not the kind written down, the kind you learned by watching, the kind that kept you safe. The children lean in closer. You watched how people moved. You listened to how names were spoken. You paid attention to who could stand where and who could not. That is how you made it, not by accident, not by chance, by knowing. The night settles around them, quiet but heavy. Freedom came, they said, but you still had to learn how to live inside it. No one laughs, no one interrupts. Some stories were never meant to entertain. They were meant to prepare you. Living under that kind of pressure did not leave people with only one path. In places like Macon, Black families had to make decisions every day about how to survive inside a system that never fully let them go. Some stayed, some left, some tried to build something where they were, even when the ground beneath them was uncertain. Others looked beyond the county, beyond Mississippi, searching for something that felt closer to real freedom. Those decisions were not simple. They were shaped by land, by family, by risk, and by what people believed might be possible somewhere else. Leaving meant stepping into the unknown. Staying meant learning how to live inside a world that still carried the weight of everything that came before. That is what makes this part of the story so important. Because history is not only about what was done to people, it is also about what people chose to do in response. For some, survival meant holding on to land when they could, holding on to family, to church, to community, to anything that could create stability in an unstable world. For others, survival meant movement. It meant stepping away from places like Macon and heading towards cities that promised work, distance, or the possibility of something different. Not perfect, not easy, but different. That movement would come to shape generations. It would change where families lived, how they worked, and what opportunities their children might have. And even then, the story did not become simple, because leaving did not mean escaping everything. It meant carrying memory with you, carrying lessons with you, carrying the weight of where you came from into wherever you were going next. The past did not stay behind in places like Macon. It traveled with people, shaped how they moved, how they trusted, how they built, and how they protected what mattered most. That is part of what makes this story more than one place. It becomes a story about movement, about survival, and about the choices families made when the ground beneath them no longer felt like it could hold them. Some left hoping for distance. Some left hoping for opportunity. Some left simply hoping for breathing room. But no matter where they went, they carried the knowledge of what they had lived through, and that knowledge became part of how they shaped the next chapter of their lives. That is where migration enters the story, not as a simple escape, but as a decision shaped by pressure, hope, and necessity. People did not leave places like Macon because the past meant nothing to them. They left because the future was asking hard questions. Where could a family breathe? Where could work be found? Where could children have a better chance? For many Black families, leaving Mississippi did not mean forgetting home. It meant trying to survive beyond the limits that home had had placed around them. Some went north, some went west, some followed relatives, some followed work, some followed rumors of a better life. Every departure carried a story. Every suitcase carried memory. Every road away from Macon still had Macon inside it. That is what migration does. It moves bodies, but it also moves history. It carries songs, warnings, recipes, church habits, survival lessons, and family names into new places. People may have left the red clay behind, but the red clay did not always leave them. It stayed in the way they raised children, told stories, watched danger, and remembered home.
If you're still here, thank you. Please subscribe, like this video, and turn on the notifications so you don't miss where this story goes next. We still have more to uncover. Who stayed in Macon and why? Who left Mississippi and what they carried with them? What happened to land and ownership? And how the Black codes shaped real life after slavery. Share this with somebody whose family comes from a place people rarely talk about, because Macon is not just one town. It is a reminder that Black history lives in the places America tried to overlook.